Hello everyone and welcome to this lesson where we are going to learn about objects. So objects are a special type of structure, and actually we have talked about objects a little bit before, but in this lesson we are going to clarify what they actually are. So we have different type of structures that as we talk, and these structures have different kind of abilities, like they have copy, drop, key, store. And for the objects, structure need to have this key. Since we can only directly store the structures which have key in the global storage, our objects will be the ones which have the key. Now here I got a game item which has the name and power. And here we are using string instead of vector U8. And to use the string, you need to import it from the standard library. I also have a player which also has a key, and it has a name and a level. Now let's create a game item. For this game item, I'm going to need a signer, a string, and power. So I'm going to use this string and power for this name and the power section so that I can create this object. After I create this object, I'm going to move it to the signer. That's why I also need the parameter signer. Now, to create the game object, we simply write the game item and we pass the name and power. Since the name here in the structure is the same with the name in the parameter, we don't need to say name, we just say name. So instead of this, as we talked on the last lesson, we just say name. Now that I have created this object, I can move it to the signer like the ones we did before. I'm going to move this to the creator, which is my signer, who sends this transaction again becomes the signer. The objects are like the special type of structures that we can store globally, and also we can store them or we can send them to different addresses so that they can have an owner. And that's what we call the objects, because we can have many different types of structures, but once you hear objects, then you need to remember that, oh, there's a structure that has a key and which can have an owner. Next, we are going to create a player. And again, it's the same process. We create a player struct and then we transfer or we move this player to the creator. Next, we are going to transfer this item. To transfer this item, we say this is an object. And the type of this object is game item. Move, you can have all kind of objects. So this is the one that we created. And we are moving this actually to parameter. Now, we are going to call this transfer function from object. And we are going to pass the owner. So we are going to transfer it from the owner. We are going to transfer this object. And we are going to transfer it to this address. It's just like transferring coin, but the places of the parameters are different and we are using transfer from the object. We will get item owner, so we are going to get an item as the parameter and we are going to find its owner. It's going to return an address and we are going to say, okay, I want to call the owner function from the object, and then I'm just going to pass the item. So it's going to get this object and it's going to get its owner. That's why I have the address as return value, because this extracts the address from the object. Next, we have get item power. So we are going to get the item and we are going to return the power of the item. Since we are getting item in this function, we say acquires like we did on the previous lesson. So this function acquires game item. Here I'm borrowing it globally. In the last lesson, we used borrow global mute, and we said that if I don't need to change anything, but if I'm just going to read something from the object, then I don't need to say mutable. For that reason, here we are saying borrow global, and we are passing what type of object that we are dealing with here, which is the game item. And inside the parentheses, we are going to say, okay, from object, I'm going to call object address, and then I'm going to pass the reference of this item. This is going to give me the game item, which I borrow globally. I'm just going to return from this game item the power field. Again, with this line, I can actually borrow items globally. So here I'm borrowing this item. I didn't have to have any checks like the signer and something like that, because I'm not going to change anything. I'm just going to read some data. And finally, we have the level up function. To level up a player, we need to acquire the player first so that we can actually work on it. And our parameter will be this player. First of all, I'm going to say player address, and then I'm going to retrieve player's address. I will say mute player and I will borrow it mutably like the last lesson. What I want to borrow mutably, the player object, and then I'm going to paste the player address. And finally, I'm going to say this mutable player dot level, and I'm going to increase it by 1. You may want to actually check if the signer is sending this transaction, or you can have a better mechanism so that it would be more secure. But here the idea is to understand how we are working with objects and what the objects really are. And objects, again, are a special type of structure that we can directly store globally and which they can have an ownership. So I can have an object, you can have an object, and we can pass objects around and store them globally in the memory of the blockchain. This is what the objects are. We have been using them before and we will use them later. So if you have missing points in your mind, do not worry, you are going to encounter them again and again, so you can relax. And that will be all for this lesson. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I will see you on the next one.